So, welcome to the latest episode of Rounds Rant, and I'm over the moon to say I'm joined by Bill Oakley, who is a television writer and producer best known for his work on the comedy series that some of you may know, which was known as The Simpsons. And Bill has also recently ventured into the vlogging world too, in which, if you go onto his Instagram, you can see him critiquing fast food all over America. So, thank you so much for coming on the show, Bill. And first and foremost, how are things with you today?
Oh, things are good. Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I think this is maybe the first Irish podcast I've ever been on.
Yeah, so hopefully the look of the Irish is in store for the next while.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And yeah, so what I do with most of my guests when I have them on is I tend to find out about their childhoods and all sorts of stuff. But one of the things that when I deal with people who are quite creative and what I kind of want to know is like what did Bill Oakley get up to when he was a teenager? Like what was his hobbies? Was it annoying teachers? Was it away from school? Like what were you and your friends getting up to in your early years?
Well, we did get in a lot of trouble, although not so much in school, more out of school. When I say we, a lot of times it's going to be referring to me and Josh Weinstein. Josh Weinstein, who may your listeners may know, was my best friend in high school, and then we went on to a comedy writing career together, where we wrote for and ran The Simpsons, and then we've done a whole bunch of other things subsequent to that. And Josh, when I say we, a lot of times it usually me and Josh. Anyway, we tended, I would say, the thing that we did most was we wanted to do funny, write and draw funny stuff. That was kind of it kind of goes hand in hand with the childhood stuff that you asked about. Like when I was a kid, when I mean under 10, like we still lived in an era when there was not very much for kids to do. Like there was no cable TV, there was no Nickelodeon, there wasn't very much entertainment for kids at all. Like the kids, you get to go to the movies maybe twice a year when a Disney movie came out and your parents would take you. And that was it. And otherwise, you get to watch cartoons on Saturday morning or read Mad Magazine. I don't know how famous Mad Magazine is in Ireland, but in America, it was like it was the thing between like 1955 and 1980 that every kid read, and that's where your sense of humor came from. So I spent a lot of time. We lived on a farm out in the country, and there was nothing to do most of the time. I spent a lot of time reading Mad Magazine, and I really wanted to draw, and I wanted to draw and write funny stuff like I saw there. And so as time went on, I started to do that more. I became a cartoonist. I started doing fairly decent cartoons in like second grade. And as time went on, I became more of a cartoonist. And in high school, as a teenager, I started drawing cartoons for the high school newspaper. And then I met Josh, who was more of a writer, and we kind of collaborated on a lot of stuff, eventually founding our own high school humor magazine, which was a really good for high school. It was a very impressive magazine. And then we went on to do more stuff like that in college and gradually transitioning into TV. It was a pretty natural progression, and mainly just because we really liked to write and draw funny stuff.
Yeah, well, it's easy now to have your imagination taken away from you, as you were saying there, with social media or even Nickelodeon. That's still kicking these days as well. But having a friend nearly beside you that you could bounce ideas off, make fun of, they would return the favor, no doubt. That obviously helps. And I've even heard some maybe the more say film orientated. I know like Seth Rogen has a pal that which he writes all the stuff with, and having that kind of friendship develop into nearly an outlet for your artistic tendencies. Did that like kind of inspire both of you, or was it a case where even if you were going solo, you would have always gotten into writing?
I think I probably would have gone more into like drawing a comic strip type thing. But part of working with Josh was the collaborator. It's so much more fun to work with a partner.
Yeah,
There's the upside is it's so much more fun. You don't sit there alone beating your head against the wall. However, you have to split the money, and that only becomes an issue later when you start to be like, hey, we both have two or three kids and we're
yeah,
splitting the money between us, and that becomes annoying at a certain point. But when you're young and that doesn't really matter so much, it's so much funner to write with a partner than it is assuming that you guys are friends. Like if a lot of times people get into writing partnerships where it's just like they barely know each other, and then there's a lot of conflict. Since Josh and I were already friends and we already kind of had the same sense of humor, it really worked well.
yeah. I could imagine, and as you progress through the teenage years and high school, college, like most people do, you and as you were saying, Josh, you find yourselves, you continue writing. And from what like I've read about you and what I've heard, like when you came out of college, you were doing some writing bits here and there, which is often the case with aspiring writers. You kind of have to earn your trade and wait for the big break. But before maybe the Simpsons came to your doorstep, there was like a prolonged period in which like you were
Yes.
essentially unemployed.
Oh yeah.
And not I don't want to ask like how tough that was, because obviously maybe there was some doubts in there, but was there ever a moment in that kind of prolonged period where you're thinking, okay, maybe this writing dream ain't going to work, and maybe I should get a, quote unquote
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think I to say we had about Josh and I had about 4 years between college and when we finally got hired on the Simpsons. In fact, it was almost exactly 4 years. Where we were unemployed. Like we had written a lot of sample material that wasn't really getting us. We wrote sample material for David Letterman and Saturday Night Live and things like that. It wasn't really getting us anywhere. And we had a couple of jobs on cable TV shows that were kind of cheap. We moved out to Los Angeles to work on another TV show, which was immediately canceled. And part of and this is part of what happened then is that we were like, we were on unemployment. The unemployment was running out. And in fact, because we'd already been out for, I think it was 26 or 39 weeks or whatever. And this is what happened. We had a script, like the whole thing about writing, at least back then, writing for TV was you needed to write a sample script. People call it a spec script because you're writing on a spec. So you would write a sample script, one or more sample scripts, a show that you would like. So you'd write a funny script and people would read it and go, hey, these people will assign them a script. These people can write in the style of an existing show. Let's give them a shot. And so what we had a spec script. Our spec script was pretty crummy. This is the thing. It was a spec script for this show called Coach, which you probably don't know in Ireland,
I don't,
about a
unfortunately.
college football coach. There was a real mediocre show, but we were like, this is just as good as the average episode of Coach. And it was, it was, but that didn't really impress anybody. And finally somebody gave us, and in fact, at the time it was annoying, but in retrospect, it was probably the most useful advice we ever got was like, you guys this isn't not that good. Yeah, it's as good as the average episode of Coach, but that's not very good. And it's obvious that you don't like this show very much. So what you need to do is write a script for a show that you do like. And we were like, oh crap. Like at that point, we were like, the unemployment was running out. We were both considering abandoning the career. I was trying to get a job at the State Department in the U.S. And I sent away for the Foreign Service exam, which is what you have to take to join the State Department. And it was so hard. It was so hard that I was just like, okay, let's write another script. Let's do it. Let's go ahead and write another script. And at that point, so we decided a show called Seinfeld. You guys have heard of Seinfeld, right?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of
Okay.
Larry David's work, so no,
It had
well.
been had only been on 4 times. It was still called the Seinfeld Chronicles at that point, but we loved it. We thought it was like the best TV show that had ever come along. So we wrote a spec script for that, and then things started to happen. Just basically suddenly, it was because we were like, we really loved the show. We wanted to write a script that was as good as the show. And we did. In fact, Larry David called it the second best. He read it and he called it the second best Seinfeld script he'd ever read, or spec script he'd ever read, which was high praise coming from him. It's even
Yeah.
second best. And so at that point, the guys at The Simpsons read it and they liked it, and they gave us an assignment to write an episode that finally became Marge Gets a Job. It was Conan's story. And so that was what happened. And it was definitely a test of persistence, because we just given up and not written that script, I'd be lucky to have a job at the State Department. And we wouldn't have had any of the career that we have currently had. And furthermore, I should say this, when we got hired at The Simpsons, we already had a job on another show. Our spec script had gotten us a lot of meetings with good shows, and we had a meeting. We had been hired already to work on another show that was a good show, but ultimately didn't last very long. And we called our agent and said, look, before we started this show, could you just call The Simpsons, just call them and see if there's any chance that they would ever hire us? And he called them and they did. That was that, like I cannot stress how worth it was to have him make that call, because what had happened is between the time we were at Marty Gets a Job and that time of that phone call, Jake Hogan and Wally Wolodarski, who had been writers there since day one, had left. So there was a vacancy. There was an office with two guys, two desks in it, and there was a vacancy for two guys, and they hired us. And it was those two things, those two events were both things where we just we just pushed a little harder than we normally would have, and it ended up paying off. All in the 6 month period.
Yeah, and by the sounds of it, rather than doing the crummy exams and going for a different role, like kind of the willingness to go that extra mile pay dividends, obviously, and then you suddenly find yourself in with the likes of Conan and the rest of the writing staff with the Simpsons, and I get a great kick out of seeing the pictures of the writing
Yeah,
room where you think it'd be something very glamorous and organized. It's just like pizza boxes and just people smoking cigarettes with loads of papers around. But
yeah, that was part of the charm in those days. We wanted to make it like uh, the dorm room atmosphere of the show was very much part of the charm. And when Josh and I took over the show, we moved back into that room, the room that you see in the photos,
yeah,
because it had been out of that room for a couple of years. We moved back in. We did have some of the couches repaired, but other than that, we were like, let's get back to the dorm room atmosphere that made this show great to begin with. And that was part of the fun. You're right, and uh, it was not glamorous at all. And there was no Hollywood element to it whatsoever, and that was part of the fun of the show. Is that most of the people who worked there at that time had not worked on other TV shows. They had worked on either Saturday Night Live or come from other areas, and so it was the least Hollywood of the TV shows that I ever encountered, and I think that's to its credit.
yeah. It sounds awful like your favorite restaurant, or not maybe your favorite, but like the one you like to go to regularly because of the atmosphere and just kind of the vibe it gives you
Yeah, yeah.
personally. That little room, and within that room on a regular basis, as you said, you had so many creative minds, but you and Josh have pretty much been thrusted in here, and you've spoken about how you felt somewhat, nearly out on your feet, a little bit intimidated at the
Oh
start.
yeah.
And I'd like to know, was there a joke you made? Was there a episode idea? Was it even just someone like Conan saying, "Hey Bill, write this for me," or come up with this idea? Was there a particular moment where you felt that you finally took that step, where you felt fully comfortable with the rest of the writers and on par with them?
there was It was a very gradual process because as you said, when we arrived we didn't know what we were doing. This is our first real TV job, and we had no idea what it was going to be like, even day to day. Like, we didn't know what the job entailed, and a lot of it was just sitting in the room for the first couple months and gradually getting. And I think I remember the stuff that we said. Most of the stuff we said, we were pretty quiet early on, and we started to say, occasionally we would say jokes, and when one of them got in, I would write it down, so I would remember. And gradually over time we started to get more and more jokes in. But that wasn't like, I mean, that was a competitive room because we had George Meyer, John Vitti, Swartzwelder, all there in the room at that time, so it wasn't like they needed our input. But finally what happened was, um, we got more. I think Al Jean said we were doing a good job at one point, which was very high praise at that point. And then also, I remember when we turned in the first draft for Marge and Chains, John Vitti said it was the best first draft of the year, and that was the highest praise we've ever received, because it's like, it was John Vitti first of all, and also
Yeah.
there was a stellar lineup of writers that year. So we were very that's something I still remember to this day. And I think around that point, um, I think we felt pretty confident. And furthermore, what happened after that was that almost all of those guys left. That was
Yeah.
the strange thing that happened, is that, like, after we had been there for about 8 months, all of the original guys except for Conan left, including and Dan McGrath came in, and it was for at least 3 or 4 months. The only people on the show in the writing department were me and Josh and Conan and Dan McGrath. And so we just kind of made up stuff on our own, and that was the best time we ever had there, for sure, because we didn't have any responsibilities, and it was a lot of fun.
So yeah, by the sounds of it, it was nearly like school's out, the shackles are
Yeah,
off. But
exactly.
with, say, you mentioned there that the writing room has changed, and when there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of episodes, it's bound to change. But did you go in there and start writing and think, okay, there's a set structure for this to work? There's been a variety of episodes, and even like I actually watched there with my housemate last night, the 22 stories about Springfield, the steamed hams, famously written by yourself. but that doesn't really have a flow to it. That's just like segments, a bit like Pulp Fiction and whatnot. But most Simpsons episodes have nearly a graph to it or an underlying
Oh
theme
yeah,
or a
yeah,
big mission about it. Was that something that was established really early on? Like that
yeah.
was the DNA. So when you gathered around, they were like, this is what we need to do. These are the building blocks. Let's get the jokes going. Let's get the characters going. Or how did that process kind of evolve or present itself?
By the time we got there, it was pretty much set in stone. And I think the thing was that the formula of the episode, the way that the episodes broke down was pretty similar. Like the structure of the episodes was always fairly, even no matter how different the episodes were, it was always pretty similar since the early season two. And then once in a while, there'd be an episode that would still be in that structure, but would kind of break the bounds of the show, like the monorail episode. And then for the next 2 years, when David Merkin was running the show, he did some more. I think he kept the structure fully intact, but he did some more episodes that kind of pushed the boundaries of the show. And then by the time Josh and I took over, we knew what we wanted to do, which was a combination of those two things, which was keep the structure, go back to shows that were more like from season three, which we considered the best season in the history of television. We basically just tried to copy season three with, we had like, the season three had one Itchy and Scratchy episode, one Sideshow Bob episode, three Lisa episodes, six Homer episodes. So that's what we did when we did made up season seven. It was just like that. But then each year we said, let's have two episodes that completely break the format, because this show has been on long enough now that we can go nuts, and there's no reason not to do stuff like 22 short films or Frank Grimes or the spin-off Showcase, because we were like, this show's been on long enough, the viewers will get it, and it'll be fun for everybody to write something somewhat different.
Yeah. And Frank Grimes is, you'll be glad to know, my old man, my father's favorite episode.
I'm
He
so glad. The weird thing about that is that nobody liked it when it came out. I think everybody was shocked that it was so dark, and they didn't quite. I think that you have to have seen a lot of Simpsons to appreciate that episode, because
Yeah.
otherwise you just think this is an awful, sad story about this uptight man and this moron, Homer, who is being even more of a moron in this episode. But, it was a commentary on the whole history of The Simpsons up to that point. And it's really, I'm glad to hear it was your dad's favorite, because, like, I think that people, it only came to be popular. Like a lot of this stuff only became, including steamed hams, only became popular maybe about 15 years after it aired. After the general public had gotten to see a lot more Simpsons in reruns, because then you understand, like, oh, this is an episode for Simpsons fans. This is an episode that you can only really appreciate if you've seen a lot of Simpsons prior to that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you know more than I do in that respect, where just these clips, there's now Instagram pages where it's just like Simpsons clips, and every single day you've got highlights, so to speak. And it's just so accessible. And like the gags are limitless when you've got that such an extensive archive. But one thing,
I'm glad to see it's
sorry, go on.
also taking a new generation of people. Now that Disney Plus is finally airing it, I don't know if it's on Disney
Yeah,
Plus where
no, it's
you
on
are,
Disney Plus. Yeah,
but oh, good, because for about the past 10 years prior to that, it didn't come on Disney Plus till 2020, and for about 10 years before that, you could only see it either on TV or on SimpsonsWorld.com, which was a catastrophe because you had to log in with your cable provider ID, and it still showed you the commercials. So a whole generation of people who are now between the ages of 10 and maybe 20 never saw The Simpsons. But now that it's on Disney Plus, kids are seeing it again. And so, like, little kids under 10 are becoming Simpsons fans again, which is exciting.
yeah, no, absolutely. And just to go back, even to refer to the fact that like I can watch episodes with my dad, and he can relate to being having to put up with me as his son, and I have to kind of view him as an Abe Simpson type character and kind of joke that his days are numbered before he goes off to the old folks home. And it's a bit of a give and take, but that's kind of at an essence of what the Simpsons created, was such a varying like amount of comedy, heart, emotion, where a 70-year-old could enjoy the episode and a 5-year-old could enjoy the episode, and they wouldn't get lost in the narrative. And yourself, like you've written some episodes where it's maybe heavy on Marge or maybe geared a bit towards Lisa, and then maybe the Bart and Homer ones would be a bit more rowdy and whatnot. Having said that, Mother Simpson episode is the only episode that made me cry, but it basically reaffirms the kind of status that there was such a balance there. And at stages, you'd have very emotional episodes, you would have a mix, then you'd have, as you said, maybe with the monorail, just a barrage of kind of social commentary and
Mm-hmm.
references. How did that balance, or I suppose the better question would be like, how did you decide on that balance before you'd start writing, or was it something just by scene you'd be like referring back to the first scene and going, okay, we can do this and that? Or how did you strike that balance between emotion and comedy?
Well, it was both on, I guess I'd say it was both on the macro level, on the micro level. Whereas we would say on the season, we say we want seven. If there's 24 episodes in the season, 22, and we'd say, okay, we want 7 or 8 of these to have emotion, to be fairly heavy emotional episodes. Like Marge Be Not Proud, the Christmas episode or whatever, and or grounded. Emotional episodes tend to be more grounded, tend to be more about things that are emotional stories, whereas stories about the the about burglary or Homer going into space or whatever are
Yeah.
not, they don't have a lot of emotion built in. So we knew from the outset when we planned when Josh and I would plan this season in 2 parts after the writing retreat, and the writers would say all come forth with episodes they wanted to write. We'd say, okay, let's put them in this order. So there's an emotional one, there's a Lisa one, there's a Homer one, there's a really crazy one, and then there's another emotional one, so that you wouldn't get bored, so that they'd come in an order that was mixed up. Then in certain episodes, Mother Simpson is a good example. Like, this episode is going to be heavy. It's going to have serious emotional components, and we know once you know where the story is going, you know what those scenes are going to be, and part of, you just don't want to get in your own way. Part of that is like, let's let this be emotional. We don't have to crap it up with a lot of silly jokes. Sometimes you want to have an emotional scene and just let it breathe, and you don't have to have it be. The Simpsons is very funny, but sometimes it's necessary to go a whole page with no joke if it's a really sincere, sweet scene.
Yeah. And that actually reminds me of Homer's triple bypass. I watched that with my old man a couple of months ago, and he had open heart surgery about 10 or plus years ago. And there's a scene where Homer's at the hospital bed and he's getting all teary eyed with Bart and Lisa. My dad was just like, he's like, I nearly remember saying that to you and your two
Oh,
brothers,
wow.
except what I said was probably a bit harsher. But that's kind of a good example of such a hilarious episode, to where just in a split second it changes. But on the nearly the arc or the curve, as you said, with episodes and not getting in your own way, do you find, and you've worked in a variety of different projects, as you said, short skits, longer formats, and now even say with modern comedy, you can have shows where it's 30, 40, 60. If it's Stranger Things, it could be about 5 hours for one episode.
Right, right.
Do you feel, and like I personally feel with comedy, the 25 to 30 minute kind of range is the absolute sweet spot? Like, what are the subtle differences between maybe longer form comedy and the shorter form when it comes to TV shows, like the difference between a 20-25 minute one and maybe a 45-50 minute episode?
I think you're right. I completely agree with you that, like, first, well, if we're not assuming we're not talking about sketches, but we're talking about stories with a narrative. Yeah, I think
Mm,
about 22 minutes is just about right. Like, almost every time that a comedy has done an hour-long episode, it seems too long. It seems like it's running out of gas, and it's not that funny in the second half. And I've never felt that like an extra 40 minutes made a comedy much better. Sometimes maybe an extra 1 or 2 minutes did, but that's for TV comedy. Like, and for a 40-minute show, you've got to have a story that keeps people's interest. I mean, that's usually dramas are that long, 45, 48 minutes generally for broadcast drama, or 44 minutes now. Like, you have to have a story with 6 acts that keeps people's interest by having a number of twists and so forth, and doing that with comedy as well is very hard, and it's very rarely done. Like, even in a movie, if you look at movies, that are comedy movies, they actually don't have nearly as many jokes as a TV. Like with a few exceptions, they don't have nearly as many jokes as a TV show because the audience gets exhausted. Like think about like a movie like Airplane. That's all jokes all the way through, and that's a very specific, rare type of movie. Or The Naked Gun. There are almost no movies like that made. Even like the funniest movie, which is to say with like Austin Powers, for example, has a lot of jokes, but there's also a lot of character comedy, music montages, and things that are not just gags. That are other types of humor. The audience like if you want an audience to laugh a lot and not get tired, I think that's why stand-up specials are usually like about 40 minutes or something like that, because there's a lot of jokes. And even then there's lulls. Sometimes the comedian will go 45 seconds or a minute setting up a story before there's a laugh. I think a lot of it depends on your audience. A lot of it depends on the format you're in, and also what you're trying to accomplish. If you just want to be funny, it's very different than if you want to pull on people's heartstrings or tell a compelling story.
Yeah, no, and I agree. And kind of reverting back to the Simpsons for a moment, the one of the things you mentioned earlier on in the episode was how the dynamic has changed with, as you said, like for instance, now Simpsons clips are everywhere to be seen all over the internet. And you've said back when you were writing or even going through school, it was a completely different era. And even now, like as months go by and you even have comedy writers, you've got directors of films all saying that, comedy is that kind of sticky area at the moment now where you don't want to maybe offend anyone. But back when, say, you were writing with The Simpsons, you went and wrote about some pretty challenging topics at stages. Like one of the big ones was Homer's phobia, in which
Yeah.
you dealt with a gay character. Like back in that time, like how did you and the group of writers approach, say, an episode like that or similar episodes where maybe you were stepping on toes potentially with, professionalism, but then also respect?
Well, The Simpsons was not an area. It didn't really breed. It didn't really lend itself to being offensive. Like it was offensive. Yes, in 1989 it was offensive. Shockingly, nobody remembers back in 1989, 1990 when "Eat My Shorts" was considered offensive. When people had T-shirts that said "Underachiever" and proud of it, they banned them in schools. And like this society as a whole has declined quite a bit since then, because like now
Absolutely.
that's nothing. That's nothing. And I think the thing is, if you're even in 1997, say, if you were out there looking for offensive comedy, The Simpsons is not where you're going to go. You're going to go to South Park, or you're going to go to Family Guy, or whatever. The Simpsons is not. That's not their territory. And we weren't trying to do what the episodes you're describing. And we had a censor as well. I mean, the network had a censor who wouldn't have let us do that stuff if we wanted to. And we only ran into conflict with the censor a few times. One of which was that whole episode, Homer's phobia. As you said, the censor hated it and said we couldn't do any of it. And we just said, never mind, we're going to do it. And then by the time it was animated, that censor had been replaced with a new one who just said it was fine. So that's the way that unfolded. But in most cases, we were not trying to be offensive. It was like we were trying to push a little bit of a line where how many times can you show Homer's butt? But even so, we didn't like to have jokes about farts in The Simpsons. Like, we'd rarely do that. We'd rarely do stuff that we couldn't get away with saying scumbag most of the time. Like the censor was pretty strict. But The Simpsons, again, was not the place to be offensive. There were other places to find that kind of stuff if you wanted it.
Yeah, and that kind of reverts back to my point about the variety of ages that would be viewing it. And that just kind of makes me want to ask you now, is like, at that time of writing season 4, 5, 6, etc., like, was The Simpsons the juggernaut it is now? Like, it feels like if you went up to a complete stranger and just said, "Have you seen The Simpsons?" 99,000 out of 99,001 are going to say yes. Was it a juggernaut back then,
No,
or was
no,
it kind of like,
it was briefly, but it was a very strange thing. Like now, because this is the longest running TV show in the history of television, other than Meet the Press or whatever news show, 60 Minutes. It's everybody has heard of it. Everybody has heard of it. As you said, back then, people had heard of it because it was so famous in season 2 and 3. In season 2 and 3 was when the Simpsons, like Simpsons Mania, every Christmas, in 1989-90, every Toys R Us was filled with Simpsons toys. There was so much Simpsons merchandise all over the place, T-shirts and crap, that you couldn't stop hearing about it. And then in season 2 and 3, when it went up against Bill Cosby on TV and beat Bill Cosby, everybody was hearing about it as well. But by the time that we got there, and certainly all the way till the time we left, it had kind of settled into a groove where the show was not in the top 10. It was generally between number 40 and number 60 for the week. It did not even win the time slot. We would always get beat by this show called Mad About You, which everyone has now forgotten. But we were regularly beat by that. And what was happening was when we broadcast the show, every kid would watch it. Some people between 18 and 34 would watch it, and nobody over 34 would watch it. So you would never run into people. You rarely would run into adults unless they were kind of comedy nerds who had watched the show on Fox when it was originally broadcast. Everyone was watching Seinfeld, everyone was watching other shows like that, but they were not watching The Simpsons. Adults were not watching, by and large, were not watching The Simpsons unless they were the kind of people who, were early adopters, were fans of comic books and animation and stuff, which back then there weren't that many adults. Animation was still considered a thing for kids. Until there became you couldn't ignore it. Once King of the Hill and South Park and all those other shows started to come on, then it started to break that a little bit. But you'd always run in, even when you worked on The Simpsons, you'd run into people who would say, I don't watch cartoons. Cartoons are for little kids. And they'd say it to you, and you'd be offended, but would not react because that was a common attitude back then.
Yeah, so my dad would have been completely out of place if he was doing what he's doing now back in the 90s. It's good to know.
Yeah.
It's good to know. And with the Simpsons, you had a variety of titles like writer, story editor, executive producer, which changed your expectation of yourself, how people viewed you within the organization and maybe the writer's room and stuff like that. One thing I want to ask is, as you said, there was kind of method to the genius, or some people would say method to the madness.
Mm-hmm.
Was we need to have X amount of episodes for Homer and Bart and stuff like that. Was there surely stages where you're in a writing room and the quality is so high, it's the same as it may be a sporting team having different tactics for an opponent? Like, was it basically a case where, based on your longevity or your job title, did sometimes the creative process just get decided by whoever was there the longest? Or was there always that collaboration where you could butt heads, but ultimately end up both working together and finding a place to kind of meet at a common ground? Or was there ever a case where you're like, no, this is happening because I want it to happen, we're not going with
Yes,
your
there
idea?
were those cases. There were definitely those cases. And, but in general, it was done by consensus. I think because most of the time, the group of 10 to 12 writers generally agreed on what we thought was funny. And there weren't that many times where Josh and I would say, we're forcing this in because we want to. I mean, sometimes we would definitely ignore the table. Like, a lot of times people would use the table read. The table read is when the script is initially read by the actors and a group of 50 other people from the show. And sometimes certain showrunners would use that as that's nobody laughed at that joke at the table read, we're going to cut it. Josh and I stopped doing that because we were like, that table read is not an audience that is reflective of the audience of The Simpsons.
Yeah.
And we said, we know this joke is funny, we're keeping it. And that happened as time went on, more and more. It wasn't like the writers were saying, you got to cut that joke. It was the audience who had not laughed at it. And in many, as I said, the table read for 22 short films was not good at all. But Josh and I just said, fuck, that's when we said, fuck it, we're doing this. It wasn't but the writers were all enthused about it. It was just that the audience didn't know. The only thing that ever really played all that great at the table reads was emotional stories that were very sweet and generally involved Lisa. Things that were zany or required a lot of visual imagination did not play well at the table. So at a certain point, Josh and I we stopped there used to be a second read of the script on Monday after the table read, and we completely abandoned that.
Yeah, and that's why I don't know if you've ever heard of Father Ted, the Irish comedy. Yeah. So that is a comedy that 25, 30-minute episodes, most Irish people absolutely adore it. I find it to be absolutely amazing. But they introduced it was one of the first comedies I ever saw on TV where something funny would happen and then you'd have the audience just a soundbite of the audience laughing, nearly prompting you to laugh with them. While with the Simpsons, there was so many layers that you discussed that that wouldn't have really worked. It just would have completely killed the moment, killed the subtlety maybe of the joke being built up to what the eventual punchline was. And
It's very hard to watch
yeah,
The Simpsons with an audience because I've done it in a couple times at like film festivals and things, and people are laughing, and then they miss the setup for the next joke, or they
yeah,
miss the plot point for the next thing, and then they all start to get lost, and the momentum. It's like a deflating balloon, because it is very dense and is best watched without hearing a lot of other people laughing.
yeah, no, I agree. And that was kind of the point I was trying to make, that it's
Yeah.
such a fast moving, but then also some of the best jokes in The Simpsons, it's not the first joke, which is, say, the first punchline presented to you. Like the steamed hams is a great example. Like you start laughing at the first scene, then the second scene gets more ridiculous, then it just keeps building and building and building, and you tend to just get more intense laughter with each scene and with each crazy statement. And going forward into the kind of still focusing on The Simpsons, there obviously is times there where you're saying that there was collaboration, but then there was also times where you had to put the foot down. Was there, like, when I always think of trying to write something funny or try and make a joke, it's what I find funny. Were you religiously tied to the fact that you were saying Homer Simpson is this person, I'm writing for him? Or was there ever cases where Bill Oakley's humor and what Bill finds funny found itself into The Simpsons purely on what you thought was funny rather than what you thought was best for The Simpsons?
We tried not to do that. I am sure that once in a while we did. I think part of the things is that Matt Matt Groening had this thing, which I think he called elastic reality or whatever, which was, it was okay to make a joke that was out of character one time or whatever. It'd be like a rubber band that went all the way out and then snapped back. So as long as you weren't like, once in a while you could do that, like people always love that joke about Homer knowing the Supreme Court justices or being an expert on that. Like that's very out of character for Homer, but it's still funny. And it's just that one time. And so I think we were always trying to we were definitely, I think, very cognizant of Homer. That's not something Homer would say. Homer wouldn't know that word. Homer wouldn't know who that person is, and so we were trying to be faithful to the characters in that respect. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, and that's kind of what helps with the longevity of it all. And I think it was 1998 when you departed The Simpsons. Or was it earlier or
Yes, that's
after?
right. No, it was
Yeah.
98. Yeah.
Okay. And you left because you stated that you didn't necessarily want to still be involved if you didn't feel like you could contribute to the level you expected of yourself and what you expected of the
Oh yeah,
show.
that was definitely part of that was absolutely part of it. And part of it was that we wanted to go on and do something different because we'd already been at The Simpsons for approximately 7 years. And we were like, we just felt that we were running out of gas. And we also felt that the show like wasn't going to go much longer anyway, because the comedies never went that, like the most longest running comedies in TV history went 9 or 10 seasons, Cheers and MASH and shows like that. And we were already at the end of season 8. And so we didn't, obviously we were very wrong, because now what is it, season 35 or whatever?
Mm.
We were very, very wrong. But we felt that we were going to have a hard time coming up with new stories and being inventive and creative. And also at that time, it was kind of that the tradition was that you would run the show for 2 years and leave, pretty much. And so that was also the way we felt. And we had opportunities to go elsewhere and create our own shows, which seemed like fun.
Yeah, and that a lot of fans and even some writers and producers on the shows kind of, if you look at, say, IMDb ratings rather than my opinion or your opinion, that's the decline kind of started post season 8, 9, 10. That's kind of when people generically tend to say, oh, that's when The Simpsons kind of took a downturn. But some people love the latest season, so it's kind of each to their own, really. But you mentioned there that the recycling of jokes could have been an issue. And there's that big episode where I forget, I think it's like the principal in the Pauper or
San
the
Principal the
Porpa.
Pauper, yes.
Yeah, with Seymour Skinner, where his character is basically just shown to be a complete fraud. It's just he is not who he says he is. And in a comedy where Seymour had his flashbacks to the war, he had the Norman Bates references to his mother watching over him. That kind of all just kind of got ripped away for the sake of a quick gag and what seemed then like a pointless episode. But I'm not necessarily criticizing that episode because, like, to watch it has its laughs and isn't the worst episode I've ever seen of any comedy TV show. But it is what some people say was it. That was kind of the recycling of jokes, changing a key character for the benefit just of short term gain, long term loss. Did you really kind of see that just before you left, kind of going,
No,
there's
I just disagree with all of those remarks. That's the thing where we would have done the episode in season 5 or 6. And the thing is that what people don't, first of all, I would dispute that there's any recycled jokes in that episode. It's almost entirely new, fresh jokes. The character is what people don't like is the fact that the character is not who he said he was.
yeah,
And that is the underfund. That is the thing that people have an issue with, and I respect that you can have an issue with that. The whole point of that episode is that it is a parody of one of the most famous stories in the history of stories, which is the Return of Martin Guerre, which is a story from the 13th or 14th century France, where a guy returns from war, and it's not the guy that left, but everyone kind of just pretends it is. Then that was remade into a movie that was pretty successful around that time as well, called Summersby. And that was what we were doing because it meshed so neatly with Principal Skinner and his Vietnam experience. And so we felt that 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 was a story we thought that was a very interesting story that added a new dimension to Principal Skinner and gave him, because he was already we were recycling jokes at that point, but they were the same Principal Skinner jokes, and we felt that it was adding a slightly new dimension to Principal Skinner, or to the character that was known as Armin Tamzarian. So we didn't like that. I would not say that you know personally, and I won't go into it because I don't want to offend any of the people who worked for us. I think that was an excellent episode that could have easily been in season 5 or 6 or whatever, that I would have been proud to have done. But there are other episodes where I felt we were running out of gas, and that were because Josh and I were tired and sick of doing the show in late season 8, that were still, I mean, they're still pretty good. They're still good by
some great
regular
episodes
TV
in
standards.
season 8.
Yeah, no, and there's very good episodes throughout season 8, but there's also ones that I don't think were quite up to the standards that we had in mind. That is not one of them. That's and it's the thing is that people, because it's a very polarizing episode where people have a very distinct opinion about whether we should have retconned Skinner's history or not.
Yeah.
They use that as a flashpoint. But I think also there's a lot of terrific episodes in season 9 as well. I haven't seen that much of season 10, but I would dispute anybody. I don't think that should be used as the turning point. And I don't think
Okay.
there was a turning point necessarily. I think there's been a lot of roller coastery dips and dives. From what I've heard, honestly, I only saw some of season 9, and I've seen maybe 2 or 3 episodes in the past 20 years.
Okay. Well, that's the whole point of this podcast, to kind of get the intel from the firing line and the bunkers, if you may.
Good.
But yeah, as I said, this is kind of the general, what the Instagram community would say.
Yeah,
That
I
was
know.
the big moment. But it's completely understandable. I nearly see both sides to it, but hearing the creative side to it, and I always knew, and one of the things I loved about The Simpsons was there was always maybe a reference to an old film or a Bible
Yeah.
story or something, a newspaper clipping from the 50s or a story from the 50s that kind of gave a character a bit more weight. So as you're referring to there, that only adds to it and kind of explains this in a bit more light and makes it a whole lot more sense of the episode. And with that, so you've dealt with the departure, and you've gone on and you worked on Mission Hill and Disenchantment and a few other shows. And I've watched actually a bit of Mission Hill over the years, and it's I don't even know. I don't really have the vocabulary probably to describe it, but it's a bit more, it's like a gritty, kind of grimy cartoon that's a bit more, I think, based for older teenagers. I found it a lot more relatable and funny maybe in my 20s than I did.
Oh yeah.
I'd say if I was like a 12-year-old, it'd probably get a lot more lost on me. But coming from The Simpsons, where you probably learned so much, and as you said, it had its DNA that you had to work to and create for, like, did The Simpsons always linger in the back of your head when working on those TV shows? Like, did that influence you in everything you did, or was it kind of like that was part of my life, but now I want to take this part of me or this creative edge towards whatever TV show I create or help out with moving forward?
It definitely influenced Mission Hill. I mean, that was the whole conception of Mission Hill, was because on The Simpsons, Josh and I continually noticed that there are no characters on The Simpsons between the ages of 12 and 35, except for Otto, who's not that fun to write for. And we were like, let's create a show where almost all the characters are that age, those ages. So you can do high school stories, you can do stories about lousy first jobs. That was the whole point of Mission Hill. And we used our Simpsons skills to kind of bring that world to life. Since then, we've done a lot of other things. Some of the things, I mean, are very much Futurama, Disenchantment are very much in the Simpsons mold because they're both Matt Groening projects, and there's a certain format, that he trusts, and there's a certain way the show looks. But Josh and I have done both together and independently a lot of things that are different. We've done some things that are extremely different. We've done some dramas. And the most recent thing I did was this audio book called Space 1969 on Audible, which is my opinion is the best thing I ever wrote. And it's, I would say it has definitely a Simpsons / Futurama vibe, even though it is an audio production. And I also try to use that sensibility in my Instagram videos too, which is like, I wouldn't say that's my paying job, but it's about 30% of my work time now is doing food related stuff.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny where you've grown up in a generation where I was born in '94, but you kind of grew up well before that. You wrote during that. You kind of came up the other end of that, and now you're most recently, as I said in the introduction, you're the term now is a vlogger type thing, but obviously you're a
Yeah.
lot more than
Influencer.
that.
I'm a
Yeah, an
food influencer, a
a
food
food
celebrity.
influencer as well. And if you go even like on YouTube or mainly your Instagram, you have now become this cult figure. It's nearly like the man versus food vibe of like you go around, test out some fast food, junk food, whatever you want to call it. In Ireland, we just call it Sunday food or hungover food,
Uh-huh.
the dirty food. And like, what inspired you to get into that? Was it something that you're like, I actually like fast food, I might as well start videoing me, or
Yeah.
was it someone?
I've always liked fast food and stuff like that, and like frozen food, and think what I guess I would call everyday food, which is it's like
It's not
and
discriminatory.
so I I never intended it to become my second career, although now we're on the cusp of that actually happening, um, because I always had opinions about that all the way back into when I was a teenager about like I'd always wanted to be the first one to try the new thing at McDonald's or whatever, or the new type of frozen pizza or whatever. So basically, I just kind of evolved from putting my opinions on Twitter to filming them and putting them on Instagram. And they became popular because they're slightly more funny than the average person doing that. Sometimes I actually spend a lot of time carefully crafting something that's really funny. Other times they're pretty straight with just me being naturally, rather wry about it. Um, but people, I think, appreciate the fact that I'm very honest about them, as because most Instagram food stuff is just promoting whatever the product is without an opinion, and I'm
Yeah.
extremely blunt about whether the product sucks or not, and people have come to appreciate that. I think that's why some publications have called me the Gordon Ramsay of fast food. Although I don't cook, unlike Gordon Ramsay, I'm very blunt and sometimes in a funny way about things. I tend not to post things that I don't like, but except when there's something that has a newsworthy value, like the new thing from Burger King that will suck, or whatever. Or McDonald's makes a rare misstep in a big way. So yeah, I do that, and I also post. I have other food related things. I appear on shows as an expert. I appear on the History Channel on the show called The Food That Built America as an expert on fast food. And I have my own club for food enthusiasts called the Steamed Ham Society. If anyone wants to join, go to steamedhamsociety.com. We have people from all over the world, and it's a pretty tight knit community of people who are interested in talking about food. And we all I even have a beer coming out, as you can see. Maybe your viewers can see right here. This poster,
Yeah, we can see
it's
that.
going to be the Steamed Hams Lager is coming out this summer in conjunction with local brewery. That is going to be the ideal beer to pair with a hamburger that we have worked very hard to test in that respect.
Wow. Well, if you do get the shipping okay or the green flag, you should maybe send some over to Ireland because I don't think we'll even need a good hamburger with that. We'll just gobble it up
Okay, all
straight
right,
off the
great.
bat. But and with the fast food element of it, like I look around, we obviously have Burger King, McDonald's, some of the big institutions are here in Ireland as well. We also
Hmm.
have like Supermax and some really like dog shit is the verbiage we use here, as in just really bad places. But
Uh-huh.
surely, and like I've been to America, I've had my In and Out burgers, I've had a Big Mac on Hollywood Boulevard. Like, what was the you're kind of throwing someone on the bus, but like, what was the most outrageous fast food experience you had? Well, it can either be, it doesn't have to be a terrible, like you ate a burger and you got sick, it was so bad. But like, what was the most outrageous experience you had? Because I could only imagine if I traveled to all the fast food places or chippers, we call them in Dublin, what was the most outrageous thing you came across? Or
Oh, I don't know that this would anybody in Ireland would appreciate this, but Burger King in America is has been going through some tough times, and they still have some the really a really good burger and a couple of really good chicken sandwiches, but a lot of the other stuff they introduce is terrible. And the 2 or 3 years ago they introduced tacos, which is not in the it's not the
oh,
kind of
that's a
thing you
weird
would get
one.
from Burger King, and they were so bad. It was obvious that Burger King is just many times just buys a warehouse. Like somebody comes to them and says, "I got a warehouse with 10 million frozen tacos in a Burger King. I'll sell them to you for nothing." And Burger King is like,
Yeah.
"Okay." And then they have all this advertising to make it seem like it's really cool to buy Burger King tacos. The Burger King tacos were so bad, and they also completely shattered because I think that they were not set up to make the tacos. So as soon as you'd open them, you just get a whole bunch of broken pieces of taco shell, and it really made me laugh out loud when I opened it because it was just like, I mean, you couldn't even pick it up. It was so fun. Anyway, that was the worst thing I've ever had in all of my fast food journeys. I've had other things that were repulsive, but other people liked them. Like one restaurant came out with Fruit Loops, the cereal. I don't know if you guys have
Yeah.
that.
No, we
They came
do.
out
We
with these
do.
giant Fruit Loops donuts that were basically donut-sized Fruit Loops covered with Fruit Loop flavor frosting, and they were nauseating. I found them to be nauseating. Other people liked them, but that was another time when I made what was a pretty fun, ultimately a pretty funny video because I was so naturally repulsed. I try to film myself having the food for the very first time, and you can see the expression on my face as it dawns on me how awful it is.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like a good time, and brings me back, I should say, to the big crisp manufacturer in Ireland is Tayto crisp, cheese
I
and onion
love
crisp.
those, and they're
Yeah,
different apparently in Northern Ireland and Ireland.
yeah.
There's a slightly different logo and stuff, but I just had some. In fact, where are they? I just you can very occasionally find them in I cannot tell which ones are from Northern Ireland and which ones are from Ireland, but I love Tato's. I love the prawn cocktail.
Yeah, that's
I love the steak and onion, which I think maybe are Northern Ireland ones. I just finished a bag of those 2 days ago. But yeah, those are I think their flavors are those two in particular are some of the best I've ever had.
yeah. They go quite unique with some of their left field flavors, which is good to see. But one thing you probably never heard about was they introduced a chocolate bar with
Oh, Tato
Tayto,
did?
yeah,
No.
with cheese and onion crisps in
Ew.
like a rectangular chocolate bar, and it is in my top three worst things I've ever tasted in my life because it's
Well,
just
I'm
the
glad they
two
tried at least.
opposite. Yeah, they tried and failed. Better to try and fail than never try at all.
That's right.
But yeah, so maybe if they sell it again, I might try ship some over to the US so you can really get your teeth stuck into them. But
I
I
would
think they're
love
out
that.
of
Oh my God.
commission,
Thank you in
unfortunately.
advance.
Yeah, I'll try if there is any available. They sometimes do like partial releases, so I'll keep my eye out.
Thank you.
And yeah, so what I normally do, Bill, is to finish the podcast, I just do some quick fire questions, send
Hmm.
everyone home relatively, in good moods, even though a lot of the
Uh huh.
stuff and a lot of the content has been very interesting and quite funny at stages. But yeah, so the first thing that comes into your mind, feel free to shout it out, but
All
don't
right.
worry, they're not
Exciting.
too incriminating or too crazy because then they'd kind of not be quickfire, not fun. So number one is, which character from The Simpsons would you most like to have a beer with, and which character would you least like to have a beer with?
I'm probably the only person who would ever say this, but I think I'd like to have a beer with Principal Skinner. I really like Principal Skinner. I always liked writing for him, and I think he has a lot. Well, first of all, I don't know that I've ever seen him drink a beer, for one. But I'm
No.
sure it probably would be an interesting experience. Not, I wouldn't want to spend the whole evening with him, but for one beer, I would want to have a conversation with Principal Skinner.
Yeah. And the worst, or the person you just wouldn't want to have a beer with?
Helen Lovejoy.
Yeah,
That's a
good
very good
shout.
answer, I think. Very
Yeah,
sincere.
yeah, very to the point. Number two, what is the best burger in America?
It's so complicated to say this, and I want to say I want because I have there's so many different types of burgers. Like there's burgers you get in a restaurant, and there's burgers that you get in a fast food place, and there's also regional burgers. And I'll just say the best burger that you can get anywhere in America is the McDonald's Quarter Pounder Deluxe, which is their quarter pounder with the lettuce, tomato, mayonnaise. The best burger that you can only get in certain parts of America is from Culver's, a fast food chain in the Midwest. They have double butter burger. And the best burger I've ever had at a restaurant is probably, it's quite possibly this one I just had in Cincinnati at a place called Zips, but it could also be at my father's office in Santa Monica. Those are not your traditional burgers. They're all a little bit different, but those are the ones I was thinking. I was thinking about this morning, actually. It's very hard to rank them because you can't even compare burgers from fast food to burgers from a restaurant or even like a food truck.
Yeah, it's very difficult without really factoring in the fact that one's made a McDonald's and one maybe will cost you $45 with some
Exactly,
chef crying in the
exactly.
background. So, and number three, I normally ask what people their favorite film is, but I thought I'd take a slightly different twist on it today. So, what is your favorite Quentin Tarantino film?
Man, that's a good question because I think it would have been Pulp Fiction, except I've seen it so many times I don't really care for it anymore. I've seen it. I would definitely have not have, assuming that we rule that out. It would be Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is the film that I don't want to hear other people's opinions. I like it so much, and I feel it's as close as we're ever going to get to time travel. That I
Yeah,
like. I don't want to hear people talking about it like it's a movie or they didn't like this scene or that scene. I always want to enjoy it. I've literally tried to keep myself from ever hearing anyone else's opinion about it because I just want to watch it and enjoy it and be transported to that era so vividly that I don't care about it as a film. I like it as an experience.
yeah. Well, my review of that film is very positive. I'm one of these, as my
Excellent.
dad says, a closet psycho who read all the books about Charles Manson and stuff like that. So when that backstory came out, and I also, as you said, like I actually love the way Tarantino presented his version of the kind of the 70s and that era
Yeah.
of Hollywood. I thought it was great. Having been to Hollywood so many times myself, even how he did up the boulevard for a few of the driving scenes was even the
Yeah. Oh my
attention
God.
to
That was
detail
amazing. Amazing.
was crazy. But yeah, no, I agree with you there. And yeah, so the next one is, what is worse, doing the dishes, changing your bed sheets, or hoovering the house?
Personally, I would say the bed sheets because it involves a lot more active. I don't mind those other two things because I can listen to a podcast while I'm doing them. The bed sheets is a very active thing that involves a lot of moving of your arms and a lot more exercise, I think.
Yeah.
And so I would prefer to avoid doing that if all possible. Oh no, it probably takes less time than those other things, definitely. But I don't like it as much because it's harder to zone out. It's more physical labor.
It requires 100% of a man's concentration to get that right.
Yeah, and I have a lot of hard times with fitted sheets. I can never get the fitted sheet on
Yeah.
properly on to not pull off on one corner or whatever, and it's frustrating.
Yeah. I know my mom's tried to teach me, I'd say about 20 times, and it must be like a football coach trying to teach a guy how to tackle, and he just is so shit at tackling and never can do it, because that's
Yes.
pretty much what I'm like with the sheets. So I feel your pain there. So one of the last ones here is, do you think the Simpsons whole idea or kind of description of the Irish is correct?
I don't really know. The only Irish things I can think of are those things from that St. Patrick's Day parade episode, the Prohibition episode, and they're way over that. They're purposely over the top, like the Australia episode was all purposely over the top as well. And they're absurdly cartoonish, the kind of thing that you would have seen in a newspaper comic strip in like 1910. So like I honestly don't. I have never been to Ireland. I can't say how accurate they are. They're intentionally silly, and I hope that Irish people understand and appreciate that.
Yeah, no,
And that just are these the things we think of the Irish getting drunk and fist fighting? That's like they're all very cartoonish.
yeah. Well, it's somewhat accurate, and listen, we can laugh at ourselves more often than not. And
Good.
one of the funniest things I've ever seen was a Twitter post about 4 years ago where it had the Kent Brockman reporting on Paddy's Day, and then the Irish, well, not the American Irish, whoever it was, kicking the crap out of each other in the background. But it was a split screen where it showed Dublin on Paddy's Day, where it had a bunch of Irish people kicking the shit out of each other on our main street. So there's some truth to that.
I never
You'll
saw
be
that.
glad to
That's
know.
hilarious.
I'd love to be able to recover because they actually like dubbed it as well, and like one of the punches in real life actually like makes the same sound effect as the video above. It's pretty
Wow.
good. And third last one is the best TV show you've seen in the last 5 years.
For me, it's Better Call Saul. That's been my favorite show. Better Call Saul, for those who don't know, is the sequel, or rather the prequel to Breaking Bad, which I think everybody knows. And that has been my favorite show. Breaking Bad was prior to that. Better Call Saul was subsequently, and it just ended earlier this year. But that's been my favorite show for years.
Yeah, it's my dad's too as well, and my
Oh,
brother's.
wow. We have a lot
So
in common, it sounds like.
yeah, yeah, it does. But yeah, it's the one I haven't seen. I've seen Breaking Bad, but I haven't got around to it. But everyone speaks so highly of it, and to
You got to
talk.
make it. The first season and a half are kind of slow, but then when it starts to pick up speed, toward in the last two seasons, it's excellent.
Okay, well, it's on the list. So, second last one is your favorite scene in a film.
Also, there's a character named Bill Oakley, a major character in Better Call
Oh,
Saul
Bill
is
Oakley,
named
yeah.
Bill Oakley,
I
which
kept,
is fascinating.
I
And I
kept
had that
getting them
guy,
up.
the actor who plays Bill Oakley has appeared in some of my fast food videos. He's a very nice guy, and so there's a weird coincidence there.
Yeah, no, I was through my Google research and whatnot. I'd sometimes be like seeing pictures of two different bills, and I was like, "What?
Yeah.
Did this guy get like a surgery done where he's just completely transformed?" But yeah,
Yes, I got
it,
I got
it's
earplugs.
it's a funny coincidence. But yeah, the follow up question was your favorite scene in a film.
My favorite scene in a film,
Yeah, particular scene.
you know, uh, okay, I can do two. There is one of them would probably be uh, the Tarantino. This is another Tarantino scene. Is the scene in the bar in occupied France where they're playing that game, and the SS officer is recognizing their accents. When
Oh
it ends
yeah,
up with the guy ordering a
Inglorious
drink like
Bastards.
this,
Yeah,
right? Yeah, Inglorious Bastards. That's one for sure. And the other one, this is a much older reference, is in the movie JFK, which is about the JFK assassination. Is the part where Donald Sutherland is playing this secret agent named X, who's explaining the entire way that the conspiracy unfolded to kill Kennedy. It's about a 6 or 8 minute scene. It's very dramatic and has stuck with me. I think we parodied it on The Simpsons, and I've done many things with it. It's a very, very effective, entertaining scene.
okay. I haven't seen that. I've seen the first one, but the second one not. So I look forward to the day I can
Check it out. It's a very entertaining movie,
successfully refer
JFK.
back to that. And last question is, if you could ask yourself a question that I haven't asked you already today, what would it be?
It would be, would you like to promote Space 1969 on Audible? And the answer is yes. Thank you for asking. Now, I don't know. I can't say for your audience that this is going to be a huge thing for people outside of America, because it requires a kind of it doesn't require, but you benefit from having a lot of knowledge of America in the 1960s. And let me just say, it's a show that as a radio show type thing that I wrote my entire all 10 episodes myself. The ultimate thing I wanted to write, it takes place in a scenario where John F. Kennedy did not get killed, but rather just went into a coma. And when he awoke, he decided we should spend all our resources trying to expand America into space as quickly as possible. So when the series starts, it's his third inauguration day. We have a space station and a moon colony is just about to open. And the star of the show is a nurse who works on the space station, played by Natasha Lyonne, who did an incredible job with the comedy. She's a hilarious person, and it's my favorite thing I ever wrote. So, if I mean, again, I don't know how many people who are especially younger people and especially people not from America will appreciate it, but it's actually been the most popular thing I've ever done that wasn't created by Matt Groening. In fact, it's so popular that we're already negotiating to do a sequel, which I hope will come to pass.
Okay. And where would be the best place to find that and everything else you're doing? Would it be
Yes, great.
Instagram?
So
What
just
would
go
it
to
be?
Audible. It's very simple to find Audible. You have an app or the website, search for Space 1969 or Bill Oakley, easy to find. Secondly, if you want to follow me on Instagram, go to that Bill Oakley or the same thing on Twitter, but most of the Instagram the food stuff is on Instagram. And lastly, should you be extremely interested in the food stuff and like want to get on the, if you want to spend more time with me, Bill Oakley, coming to my live streams and hanging out with me on the Discord, join the Steamed Ham Society, steamedhamsociety.com. There's a special level there for people who are Simpsons fans because we have a special Simpsons channel on the Discord. And we also have every month a live stream with some behind the scenes player on The Simpsons. We've had David X. Cohen, we've had John Vitti, David Silverman, all those people on our Steamed Ham Society Simpsons live stream. So those are things that you can do if you want more content created by me.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, I will get all those links in Instagram / www.web, and I will attach them in all the YouTubes and Spotify. So if anyone's interested in any
Fantastic.
of
Thank you
that,
so much.
make sure you look. There will be a lot of Simpsons fans. I even know some of my friends who are mad into it. So do feel free to click on any of those links if it sounds like something that you'd be into. But yeah, Bill, that pretty much wraps it up. I will keep my eye out for that Tayto chocolate bar. Hopefully
Thank you
it
so much. I'm
resurfaces
excited. If they come up
soon.
with any other interesting flavors, I have gotten stuff. I would say after the US and Canada, Australia and Ireland are the two countries where I have gotten the most stuff from people. It's expensive to mail stuff from Ireland, so the packages are generally pretty
Yeah.
small. I've gotten a lot of candy, and I've gotten a number of Tayto flavors, all of which I've loved, including they've had a few special like Halloween flavors or something I think
Yeah,
too.
they do that.
But I've had those, and I know maybe one of some of your listeners are those people who sent me those things. I always appreciate it, and especially because it's extremely hard to find Irish candy potato chips here. I super extra appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, I will keep my eyes out, but I do want to thank
Thank
you
you, Rich.
for taking your time out of your schedule. And yeah, no, listen, I wish you all the best. And as I said, it always sounds like you've got stuff going on. So I look forward to what's coming next in your career or with your work. And yeah, no, listen, thanks again. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Take care.